Since the start of industry, there had been narrow canals between Liverpool and Manchester, and the famous railway. But to dig a ditch deep as the Suez Canal, to cut a trench wide enough for ocean-going cargo vessels, to steam full of Manchester goods, direct from the heart of Cottonopolis. That was the dream of the Manchester Ship Canal. The ditch was a construction of monumental effort by navvies, an invention by engineers. But the story that's never been told or understood is that it was a Manchester dream that Manchester could do it, raise the money, not just bosses and mill owners, but ordinary working people. Could it? Could it ever have been, though, the People's Canal? During the 19th century, Manchester established itself as a world-class industrial region. But by the 1880s, the economy was moving into a recession. Important manufacturers in Cottonopolis saw a clear grievance as to why Manchester was losing competitive edge. It was said in Parliament that of the charges imposed to get Manchester goods to Calcutta, 60% of it was on the railways and into the Liverpool docks. If Manchester could avoid Liverpool, then there'd be work and jobs and everything hunky-dory again. Liverpool was the villain.
At the time that they were objecting, Liverpool was about halfway through completing the biggest dock development scheme that had been undertaken anywhere in the country up to that time. The investment couldn't be given to people for free. You know, they had to expect to pay for this.
The solution to many Mancunians, though, was simple. Let's have our own docks and a ship canal. Let's bypass Liverpool. Get the shipping of the world slopping into Salford. The dream was brave, but canals were fashionable, like tunnels today. Had not Suez bypassed all Africa? There'd been earlier talk of asking Parliament for permission to cut a deep ditch across the North Cheshire Bog. In the summer of 1882, there was a serious attempt to turn the dream of Ship Canal into reality. To this big house in Didsbury, Daniel Adamson, whose home it was, invited the great and the good. There was a Boddington, John Rylands, a Whitworth, a Dewhurst. There was a man from the Co-op. There was Marshal Stevens, and deliberately invited were the mayors of Manchester and Warrington, Stockport, Stalybridge and Dukinfield. They gathered here, an evening meeting on the 27th of June. They empowered a committee to form a company. The Mayor of Salford got quite overcome. Alderman Husband, he said there'd not be a grander sight under the canopy of heaven than to have docks in Manchester, crowded with shipping from all over the world.
A lot of them were members of the Liberal Party. That was a key element which pulled many of them together. But I think the other thing that interested them was the problem of unemployment and the recession, and Adamson's idea that this was a way of finding a way through the recession and creating some kind of economic regeneration of the region.
Daniel Adamson was a great man of any age, heart of gold and a mind of steel. He was a Liberal and sat on the board of the Manchester and Salford Co-op, but his work was in engineering. He was the inventor of a patent flange seam that was a major development in Lancashire boilers. Engineering was in his family. His nephew Joseph had a foundry in Dukinfield, less than a stone's throw from Daniel's. And Joseph's still there, turning out flanges that stood the test of time, the Adamson way.
What sort of man was your ancestor then?
Mad keen on engineering, right from a small boy. Very interested in new things. He'd been involved with the first railway train, started from outside his father's house in Shildon in County Durham. So he'd seen that really right from the start, and he knew how much they could bring to a place in the way of jobs and employment.
What did he want to come to Manchester for then?
Came here for a job,
Ah.
to run a foundry. And then, after he'd been here about a year, he set up his own business.
And he was quite old, and he'd made a bob or two before he got into the ship canal
Oh,
stuff.
yes, he had. Look at the towers. He wasn't the money. Partly, I think the engineering problems were fascinating, and partly, I think he wanted to give something back to Manchester, because Manchester had been very good to him.
Before any digging of a ditch could be done, the ship canal movement had to get past a proper parliamentary bill. Not everyone supported the idea.
Clearly Liverpool was threatened by what was happening, and thus the problems with the parliamentary campaign. But the other very important area of opposition came from the traditional power holders in Manchester, the merchants. They saw it as being unprofitable, and they reckoned that the chances were that they would have to fork up and put money in through the rates.
Adamson was a clever chap. As a long-standing member of the cooperative movement, he believed in participation by the working classes. It'd be a campaign, a movement, the ship canal, to rally people in the country and Parliament to support. But also, if enough working men invested in the canal, it'd be the people's, and not beholden to those Adamson so despised, the maggots of capitalism.
This populist rhetoric of Daniel Adamson struck a chord among the strong Manchester-based trade unions.
Victorian unionism, certainly until the late 1880s, was a very decent and respectable affair. We're talking about unions of self-respecting, skilled craftsmen, the people who basically saw themselves as at the top of the working class hierarchy. They weren't left-wing, and they believed in the end in some sort of harmony of interest between labour and capital. I mean, if we take a union like the cotton spinners and the leader, Maudsley, when it came to defending the interests of spinners, even against other workers in the cotton trade, were fairly tough cookie. He supported the ship canal because he saw it as relevant to the Lancashire trade, as he saw it as a way of actually boosting the fortunes of the industry, and in his view, anything that boosted the fortunes of his industry was something that would benefit his members if the union played the cards right.
It was a political campaign, the ship canal movement, professionally organised by Joseph Lawrence, with ward committees formed throughout the cotton towns. Meetings had prepared motions put and passed unanimously. Hands up and hands in your handbag, one and all. That was the Daniel Adamson way, or as some of his opponents put it, a mild form of terrorism.
His plan was for the working men of Lancashire to put their hands in the pockets and come up with penny, shilling contributions. This way, they wouldn't need the money of the big money bags of Manchester. They wouldn't need the money from the London finance capitalists. They would be able to do it on their own. And as he put it, they wouldn't have London capitalists gloating over all of the money.
But local Tories were becoming alarmed by Adamson's success.
There was certainly opposition from the Tories in Manchester. They viewed this as something which was being put forward as a liberal project, which would bring working men together with the liberal manufacturers.
Adamson was a clever man. As well as whipping up the mass campaign, he saw the necessity to have some Tory support in Parliament. So when a by-election cropped up unexpectedly in Manchester, Adamson and local Liberals told voters this time, let a Tory in.
They'd done a deal with this Tory, William Henry Holdsworth, But if elected, he'd work on the Tories for the Ship Canal cause. Duly elected, he became a key supporter of the bill to get Parliament to authorise the ditch. But despite his work on comrade Conservatives, the bill was defeated in 1883 and again in 1884. The opposition was led by Merseyside MPs. Their argument was that a deep canal would irrevocably alter the water systems in the mouth of the Mersey.
Engineers didn't really understand what controlled the growth and formation of sandbanks, and if they got it wrong, they stood to foul up the whole estuary, which would mean not only no ships for Liverpool, but none for Manchester either.
If you had the Ship Canal.
Yeah.
After 2 defeats in Parliament, the canal's promoters abandoned the plan for ships to come out into the Mersey at Runcorn. They now propose to bank the canal right round the bend to Eastham. And this scheme was also the way round the Wining from Liverpool Bay.
When the parliamentary bill was finally passed, it had been before 6 separate committees for a total of 175 days of debate. Hundreds of witnesses were examined, and the lawyers' expenses, lavish. 5 guineas a minute in 1885. An American engineer was called from the Mississippi for the Mersey and paid 4,000 nicker just for giving evidence. The total cost of all this hot air was, in today's money, about 20 million.
Victory was to Manchester, celebrated with huge public meetings. In Eccles, a triumphal arch was erected to Daniel Adamson in an ox roast. The band struck up at Piccadilly Gardens. Trade unions and friendly societies marched and rally at Bellevue. And salted. What everyone looked forward to was bringing the sea to the city. Manchester's ditch was destined to defeat. Parliament had given the canal company 2 years to raise the money. Adamson was supremely confident he could attract thousands of small shareholders. Why, he cried, the dividends would never be less than 20%. These and other extravagant claims alienated Lawrence, who resigned as the campaign organiser. Adamson began to skate on thin ice.
Well, he'd created a mass popular movement, but the people with money weren't convinced that it would make money for them. And of course, the people that it was pitched at, the working men, didn't have the money in their pockets. Many of them were unemployed.
With less than £1 million in the kitty, the board realised the ditch had not be dug unless the idea attracted larger investors from the City of London. It would be against the grain of all of the Adamson instincts to turn here. But surely Manchester had at least one friend among the merchant banks, N.M. Rothschild.
Now, Rothschild's British connection began in Manchester in 1800. Young Nathan, a red-haired, blue-eyed Jewish boy from Frankfurt, came to Manchester and made loads of money. So he settled here and later moved to London. N.M. Rothschild, now a leading bank, launched for the Ship Canal Company the share offer in 1886. Soft spot for Manchester? Maybe, but the share issue flopped disastrously. At this point, the whole scheme to dig the ditch might have collapsed if there had not been riots by the unemployed.
Suddenly, it became seen and put forward by Adamson as an idea of public works. This would be a way of dealing with the problems of the unemployment. It hadn't been recognised before, but once you got people crying out across the streets of Manchester, suddenly you started to get people saying this is something that needs to be done to provide work for the unemployed.
Many former opponents now came over to the company, but Adamson, with his ideas of popular capitalism, was seen as an obstacle to attracting the conventional large investors the board desperately needed. Holdsworth, the Tory, was now scathing of Adamson. Proposals to enable persons of small means to take shares. Interesting, but not business. We want to know what large capital thinks of the project.
So they got rid of agitating, self-made Adamson. And the replacement was a very different kettle of fish. Egerton, High Tory, owner of Withenshire, Odsall, Heaton Park and this pile at Tatton. The People's Canal had sold out to the toffs. But even Lord Egerton couldn't persuade enough of Lancashire's rich to sufficiently fund the canal. With the parliamentary deadline only weeks away, the company was still £4 million short.
The only place such sums of money might be raised was here in the City of London. N.M. Rothschild lined up a bunch of merchant banks, but many finance houses down here were doubtful the Manchester Canal could ever be profitable.
Once the big capitalists came in, they had to give them the right to take the interest first, the preference shareholders. And surprisingly, the ordinary shareholders were willing to do this. Essentially, they were willing to do this because it meant protecting the big ditch.
This last-minute rescue by big money was a crushing defeat for Adamson's vision of a people's capitalism. It was a blow to Lancashire. When the dust settled, there'd be 4 London merchant banks, Rothschilds, Barings, Morgans and Hambros, who were left with the largest shareholdings.
With the money secured, digging could begin, and the first sod was cut with this very spade out at Eastham, discreetly done for our ditch by the figurehead chairman, Lord High and Mighty Lord Egerton from Tatton.
It was 16,000 navvies who followed Lord Egerton to cut the sod. The construction of the canal provided work for the unemployed. They came from all over. They dug, they used 97 steam excavators, 220 miles of special railway, 170 locos, 6,000 wagons to haul away 53 million cubic tons of earth. Lived in swiftly put up prefab shanties, townships, specially constructed all along the length of the ditch. Where there was water, workers lived in arks. But it wasn't long before the canal's construction encountered fresh difficulty. Storms caused flooding, the earth fell back in. What was dug had to be redug, and then the main contractor, Thomas Walker, died. As part of his fee, he'd taken a considerable number of shares, and to buy off his executors cost the company $250,000. It was clear money was running out again before the canal was completed. The directors of the canal now turned to the one source of finance that might let them finish the job: local government. The original bill had contained a clause that could allow councils, not just Manchester, to support the scheme. But it was to Manchester the request was made. Please lend us £3 million. Despite the enormous amount requested, when it came before the council in March 1891, no one was surprised it received unanimous support.
They'd been preparing the ground so well over those 9 years, that they were able to push it through, and I think that they'd been relying upon that. First of all, they'd infiltrated a number of the councils. You know, they got their members onto it, people who were supporting it. And if you look at Manchester, they had made sure that the platform that people came on was a ship canal platform, so all these people with pent-up support for it.
But soon there were rumours growing that it still wasn't enough. The cat was out the bag. Fraud was alleged. These were new allegations. The directors were milking fat fees. The ship canal was in a pickle.
In December 1891, there was a 2-day meeting at the City Council. John Harwood, a veteran Liberal alderman and great supporter of Manchester's considerably successful municipal undertakings, he spelt out the sorry tale of Ship Canal Company's incompetence. Another Liberal argued that the council should now take it all over. There was fierce debate, narrowly defeated, when councillors who were directors of the company voted, and of course, voted to keep it private.
And finally, Lord Egerton's board, in the spring of 1893, struck a fresh deal. In return for yet another 2 million, they'd allow the City Council to have 11 out of 21 directors on the board. Climb down? Perhaps. But one London preference shareholder confided, the result is very satisfactory. We keep the chairmanship. The council withdraws any claim for shareholder voting power, and we have on the board a compact minority of 10. So, construction was finally completed. The cost had been nearly 15 million, double the original estimate. The scale of the triumph, though, there was no doubt about that. Manchester's future was blessed with a direct link to the oceans of the world.
They could dig the canal deep enough to take the biggest vessels, deep as the Suez Canal, but ocean shipping would still have to pass under railway bridges. So ships too tall had come here to have the funnels taken off. This was the cloakroom for Manchester at Eastham. Take a chimney off, sail on in, collect it on the way back out again. And it was a unique, skilled job, the taker of funnels. Oh, aye, an aristocrat among the working people.
The canal was formally opened for business on 1st of January 1894. The sun shone in Manchester, glorious, more like a May Day than January. A huge crowd lined the banks to see a flotilla, led by the directors of the company on board Sam Platt's yacht, the Norseman, sail up to Salford's new docks. This undertaking, wrote the Manchester Courier, deserves to be called the People's Canal. No one who saw this day is likely to forget when Manchester first opened her gates to the ships of the world. The people went partying once again 5 months later. May the 21st, Empress Victoria came to look on the wondrous work. After a short cruise on her royal yacht, the Enchantress, she made a procession through the streets of Manchester. But the canal, did it really deserve to be called the People's Canal? It had more individual shareholders, nearly 40,000, than any other company in the land, but few of them were workers. The trade unions and co-op supporters of Adamson's vision had been, like him, elbowed aside.
The enormous stake taken by the City Council reinforced the idea the canal belonged to the people. But it was a delusion. In reality, they had little control. The directors, displaying a skill noticeably absent in other areas of their management, had infiltrated and outmaneuvered the council. They'd secured dollops of public dosh for a private business dominated by the need to satisfy the interests of the City of London.